Hello, magical experimenters. Taylor Elwood here, and today I thought I would do my live stream video a bit earlier, which is why I didn't bother putting out the announcement. Well, it's just been a little bit of an interesting week because it was my birthday yesterday, and I'm getting ready to go on a little trip. But anyway, I thought that today's topic would be about how I use non-occult books to inspire my magical workings, and fittingly enough, I decided to wear this amazing shirt that my friend Victoria got for me for my birthday. So I thought, I'm going to wear that in honor of this particular topic and also because it's a new shirt. So, you know, most occultists that I've, encountered over the years, uh, they certainly have an impressive collection of occult books, and I'm not going to ever knock that. I think it's important to have some occult books. I have plenty of them. In fact, I'm reading right now Weaving Fate by Aidan Vaktir and Nature Spirits by Susan Raven, and great books about magic. But if you were to look at a lot of what I end up reading, that inspires my magical practice, you'd find out that a lot of the books I read are non-occult books. Like, for example, I recently finished reading a book on symmetry, the mathematics of symmetry, and that one, I don't know if there will be anything from it that'll inspire my magical work. But right now, I'm reading another book on algorithms, computer algorithms, and kind of the art of creativity in relationship to that. And then I'm reading a book on architecture, which is actually called The Phenomenon of Life by Christopher Alexander, and he has this four-book series, and I just got the other three books. A little bit spendy, but well worth it because these are books that explore the concept of life in relationship to architecture and how architectural design should ideally incorporate this concept of life. So I'm always reading non-occult books. Um, and the reason I'm reading non-occult books is because I find that they provide some interesting and distinctive perspectives that fall outside of occult disciplines, but nonetheless can inform the way we approach things. So you might say, for example, well, Taylor, why are you reading books on architecture in relationship to architectural design and life? Like, why even read that? And the answer to that would be because I want to understand um, architectural design in relationship to the reason how people navigate and understand space. And so, if you're doing space time magic, one of the things that you want to be thinking about is the relationship that you have with space and how space is navigated and what space means. Most people, when they think of space, they might think of space as, maybe being that big outer blackness with balls of gaseous light. That's certainly outer space, or they might think of space in relationship to I need space from someone, metaphorically and literally. But your space is much more than that. I mean, when you're walking in a home, you are navigating space. When you are interacting in a grocery store, you're navigating with other people and food and all that other stuff. You're navigating space. And again, this is one of those things that most people aren't going to necessarily inherently think of as something to do with magic, but I think that if we are looking at what we're trying to manipulate with magic, like what are we trying to realize, we need to be willing to look at these things that we might take for granted and not necessarily fully recognize. So for me, reading a book on architectural design in relationship to how someone makes that design come to life and how that life in turn inspires creativity or other things is integral to my magical work because I'm examining it in relationship to how I work with space magically. In fact, it was reading a different book on architectural design in space that helped to inspire me in relationship to how I set up my ritual room. If you were to walk into my ritual room, which you can kind of see, we've got some paintings and pictures in the background, but you would see paintings on the ceilings and drawings on the ceilings. You would see them on all over, on all kinds of different parts of the room, in places that you wouldn't normally think of putting them, because most people, when they put art up, they put it in a space where like you can easily see it. But the whole idea of it was like, if I'm designing a ritual space, then I should design it with the art really imbuing that space with a very distinctive presence and life that I in turn can work with magically. And so this is a good example of a non-occult discipline informing a magical work, and consequently transforming my understanding of magic because of the way that I'm navigating and negotiating that space with the spirits that I'm working with and things along those lines. So this is kind of where I come from when it comes to like non-occult books, and why I like to draw upon non-occult books, because you're not going to find an occult book that explores architectural design in relationship to how you design a space. There's just nothing out. There's nothing out there that's going to be blatantly, like, here's the occult secrets. Here's Libram architecture. We're going to go ahead and explore the occult esoteric secrets of architecture. But nonetheless, I mean, you can find, like in the case of Christopher Alexander, I mean, this was a guy who thought a lot about architectural design from a spiritual perspective. Now, whether he practiced magic or not, and I'm going to presume that he did not, he nonetheless thought about it from a spiritual perspective, and really examined it in relationship to that. And I think a lot of times as occultists, we get so fixated on the grimoires and on the books that have like the things about like summon so many angels, or demons, or here's this book on fairy lore or anything like that. And don't get me wrong, I mean, all of that stuff is important stuff to learn about and discover. But I think that as magicians, we should be curious about our world and curious about the way we show up in our world. And part of that means that we necessarily spend some time learning about other disciplines outside of the overt occult. Because the overt occult stuff, as interesting as it may be, at a certain point, it's just kind of like it's the same thing. I mean, you pick up one grimoire and then you pick up another, and for all intents and purposes, okay, you've got a bunch of grimoires for summoning spirits. Okay, that's nice. Now, what are you going to do with them? You're going to do that work, but how might this how might something on architectural design, or something else along those lines, influence your understanding of how you work with those spirits? And of course, if you read my own writing, you see how these non-occult disciplines show up. I find it interesting because my book, The Magic of Writing, has probably been certainly one of my most popular books. But it's interesting because I have some reviews where the people, they love it. They're like, oh, this is some amazing stuff. It's changing my approach to how I work magic. And then I have other ones where you can tell that the people reading this book are people that are taking a very conventional approach to magic. They want spells. They want something about the writing of spells or something along those lines, which isn't what that book is about. What that book is about the intersection of how the discipline of writing can be applied to magical work and vice versa in order to manifest results. But if you're someone who thinks that punctuation and magic have no relationship, you're not going to find a lot of value in that book. You're going to find it boring and be annoyed by it, because you're going to be like, well, what's the point of this book? Without recognizing that, in fact, there is a distinct point to it in relationship to how you navigate and explore the discipline of writing, and how that in turn informs your approach to magic. And I'm not knocking anyone here who takes a conventional approach to magic. There are tons of people out there that do, and it works for them, and that's great. But I'm a magical experimenter, and I don't take a conventional approach to magic. I never have, and I don't think I ever will. I mean, even the work that is seemingly conventional, like my one book, The Process of Magic, really looks at it from a process perspective that I learned from technical writing, and academia in terms of how you research and things like that. Again, you're not going to find a ton of books out there on these kinds of topics, and most people aren't going to think about these things because, as far as they're concerned, on the overt level, it has nothing to do with magic. But covertly, there is a lot that a different discipline can offer to us in magic, and we see this. I mean, you look at the most obvious example would be, well, two examples. One would be people who have tried to create an intersection between physics and magic. Typically as a way to explain magic. But there are some very interesting principles within physics that can be applied to magical work in a fruitful manner. I think it's important not to conflate one discipline with another, and we'll come back to that. And then you look at psychology and magic, and again, I mean, typically with either of these disciplines, why have people even approached them? It's really been as a way to try and explain where magic fits into things. It's been a way to legitimize magic. I don't recommend that being the reason you explore a given discipline. Like, I'm not reading about the architectural design and how a space comes to life because I want to legitimize magic through that. I could care less about that. My interest is, how can I take these concepts and practices of architectural design and apply it to magical work so that I create a different relationship with the space that I'm in, and that if I'm creating a ritual space, for example, I'm using it in a different way than I might otherwise. Or even that, reading this stuff changes my understanding of how a given space can be experienced and embodied by myself in relationship to that space. I mean, all of these are things that interest me. I don't care about legitimizing magic. I don't really see a point to trying to legitimize magic. I mean, magic is what it is. Magic is legitimately its own thing. It doesn't need to be portrayed or explained in relationship to other practices. But I understand why people do that sometimes. I mean, it could be like, oh, hey, there's this psychological explanation that totally explains magic. Well, not really, but I get why some people are interested in that and why they might, use that. That's kind of the one danger, I think, when you take any discipline that is non-occult and try to apply it to magic, or vice versa, if you tried to apply magic to a different discipline. Like, you have to understand what your reasoning is. If you're just trying to conflate the two together because you think, there's going to be some legitimizing or some definition or whatever, you're missing out on the real beauty of it. I talk about the psychologizing of magic and why I find it problematic, and it's because of that reason, of trying to legitimize magic through psychology. But I mean, I can also tell you that there are certain psychological concepts that are very helpful and useful, and it's the same thing that applies to any other discipline. I talked about the book The Slight Edge, and that I was reading recently. I think in one of my videos, or maybe I wrote about it. But I mean, it's a good example of here's this gratitude practice that that people do each day, where they're like they think of three things that they're thankful for, and they share that. Well, I mean, that's basically what I'm doing now each day, and it's a magical working in its own right, but it's also a form of it's an example of taking something in relationship to, I don't know, mindfulness or whatever else you want to call it, and applying it to magical work. Again, I'm not trying to conflate the two. I could care less. I'm just the kind of person who likes to go in and pick out the things that are relevant and useful from a given discipline. And fortunately, that it is not considered cultural appropriation. Maybe it'd be considered academic appropriation. I don't know. If that ever comes about, I guess I'll be in trouble, because some people will say, well, you're academically appropriating stuff. I think there is a very real difference between that and cultural appropriation. I want to be clear about that. But um, it boils down to this. When we look at non-occult disciplines and we learn about them and we explore them, there may not even be an obvious connection between magic and in that discipline. There may not be anything that reveals itself, in fact. But the sheer act of choosing to learn something new that you didn't know about and to challenge what you know to discover what you can learn is in and of itself a good thing to do. And when we learn to be more curious and to look at the world around us and look at the various disciplines and practices and ask ourselves, how might this apply to what I am doing and how I can approach my life and my magical work and everything else, that's when we begin to discover the true depth of our own experience with magic and with other things. And so in my case, that's really what it comes right down to. I mean, if you were to ask me, for example, why I'm learning guitar, I'm learning guitar because I want to learn a bit more about music and how music works. But you know, I'm definitely thinking about it in relationship to magical work as well. Now, I doubt I'll ever be a professional musician, um, but that's not the point. The point, it's like I'm not going to be a professional architectural person either. The point is that by exploring various perspectives in your life and finding a way to apply them to the things that matter to you, you can find a novel way to approach the work you do and allow it to transform you and your work in a very creative manner. And that's really a significant part of what I'm about, you know, as a magical practitioner. I would rather explore non-occult disciplines than just read occult books all the time. And again, I do read occult books regularly. We usually am reading at least a couple of them. And I do find them to be relevant and interesting in their own right. But the reason why I explore so many other things is that I want to situate that occult knowledge in relationship to other things and take a holistic approach to magic. Because when you take a holistic approach to magic, it necessarily does transform the way you think about the world and the way you think about your magical practice and the way you think about everything else. You transform who and what you are because you're changing your understanding of not just the world but yourself. So there you have it, and I thought I would share that with you guys, and hopefully that inspires you to explore some stuff outside of just the occult literature that's available. Again, I'm not telling you to stop reading occult books. I mean, read them, but don't just limit yourself to them. There's a whole world out there that's waiting to be discovered and can challenge the way you think about things. All right, take care and catch you guys next week.